The atmosphere here in Baucau is extremely tense. We have been warned not to travel any further. Yesterday, a United Nations convoy was ambushed and shot at just south of here. Australians are being targeted because of the perception within Fretlin that the ADF and the government are biased against them. The attack took place 2 hours east of here along a road that remains too dangerous to travel. The east of the country is highly volatile as Fretlin works out its next move. The leadership of the former ruling party, Fretlin, has condemned the violence, but it is not changing course. It's boycotting Parliament and is threatening to overthrow the new government with a show of people power. It's a land of striking beauty, whose tranquility belies the brutal nature of its past. Mired in poverty, rich in resources, and desperate to turn the tide. Well, there may be considerable support in the capital for reopening the mine, but we're told as we get closer to Panguna itself on the main island that support diminishes. We're on our way to find out. Chinese agents are operating in Kathmandu with the full knowledge of the Nepalese government, and they claim Beijing is paying for and directing the policing operation. This all couldn't have come at a worse time. We're less than 24 hours out from the pole, and people are very worried about how the situation may progress here. The day began with a carnival atmosphere on the streets of Kaiserslautern, a sea of green and gold and blue and white. 3-1! It's all over! Boris, on the eve of these games, you gave a memorable quote. You said that the Olympic Games Geiger counter had hit zoink. Where's it at now?
Well, I think it's well off the scale.
The wait for confirmation, gut-wrenching, until the realisation sank in that Sally had won the title she craved above all others.
Sally's got it!
Former US President Ronald Reagan once called him the mad dog of the Middle East. Tonight, his sanity is under scrutiny like never before. Yesterday, the protesters launched what they called the Day of Departure demonstration. And at one point, a rumour went through the crowd that they had got their wish. But this morning, Hosni Mubarak remains in the presidential palace. A shy but engaging young boy with a talent well beyond his years, his career reaching its zenith in 1982 with the release of the best-selling album ever. 5 years later came another top-selling album. It was his last collaboration with the legendary producer Quincy Jones. The end of an era, the beginning of a nightmare. With just one street party, FIFA has been vindicated in taking the risk of bringing the World Cup to Africa. They risk being the first tournament hosts to go out in the first stage of the competition, but a run of 12 unbeaten games in the lead-up to the World Cup has prompted some heady optimism here. 9 days after the cyclone and the river system that once gave life to this region now brings only death. His wounds are as fresh as his emotions are raw. Recounting his experiences brings tears to Patson Muramoga's eyes. He is just one of the latest opposition activists to flee to South Africa after being beaten senseless by thugs from Zimbabwe's ruling party. Since the attacks here at the World Trade Center, 345 first responders have died from a variety of ailments. The cancer rate amongst the group has gone up from 3% to 19%.
She turned to me and said, "Daddy, what happens if you die from cancer? Who's going to take me to Disney?" And I just was crushed, you know.
The day began with more talks between the Liberal Democrat and Conservative parties, and it looked like they were about to strike a deal until Gordon Brown threw a spanner in the works.
The reason that we have a hung parliament is that no single party and no single leader was able to win the full support of the country.
The root cause of the turmoil here in Thailand continues. The protesters clearly aggravated the situation by driving buses towards the soldiers. It's the boot-scooting, beer-guzzling, gun-toting heart of Middle America.
Chance on a shotgun today.
Where the belief in the right to own a firearm comes second only to the worship of God, and where the worship of God takes on many different forms.
And your army goes marching to hell.
Kansas is home to some of the weirdest churches in the world, and they don't come much weirder than the Topeka-based Westboro Baptist Church. It is a state steeped in history. From the Declaration of Independence to the Civil War, Virginia has been central to America's fortunes. It has a checkered history when it comes to race relations, and its military ties run deep. It should be a walk-up start for a war hero like John McCain, but it is not proving that way. As America celebrates Martin Luther King Day, the other activists who died are also being remembered, not least by those who lived through the dark days of the struggle for civil rights and lived to tell the story. Miralee Evers Williams knows what it's like to lose a loved one at the hands of an assassin. Her husband, civil rights activist Medgar Evers, was shot in Mississippi just 2 months before Dr. King's speech.
A bullet from the back of a bush took Medgar Evers' blood.
His sacrifice immortalised in a protest song recorded at the time by a young Bob Dylan.
And to see Obama, an African American, to be sworn in as President of the United States would probably drive him to say it was all worth it.
Young and old, black and white, Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay, straight, disabled and not. They are the people Barack Obama has appealed to.
When we were tested, we refused to let this journey end. That we did not turn back, nor did we falter. And with eyes fixed on the horizon and God's grace upon us, we carried forth that great gift of freedom.
It was the one race he didn't win, the president's daughter, Sasha, beating him to the top of the stairs of Air Force One, the first family returning to Washington after a night of celebrations in Chicago.